Chapter 22, Return and Discovery. It was fully dark by the time Kenny, Torin, and Lizzie came staggering into the village, having walked at a breakneck pace for several hours. When they got to Dr. Hester's house, Torin ran up the path and flung open the door. "We're back," he shouted. "Come here, everyone. We have to tell you something important." Lizzie and Kenny crowded in behind him. It was warm in the house. The fire burned brightly. In a moment, Mrs. Murdo stepped out of the kitchen with a spoon in her hand, and when she saw them, she halted and gazed at them, puzzled. "Torin," she said, "where have you been all day?" Poppy trotted out after her, but she barely looked at Torin and the rest. "I want some," she cried, tugging on Mrs. Murdo's shirt tail. "I want some. I want some right now." Mrs. Murdo patted her absent-mindedly. "In a moment," she said. "We found out where they are," yelled Torin. "Who?" said Mrs. Murdo. "Hello, Kenny." "And Lizzie?" She trailed off, sensing an odd level of excitement. "What are you talking about?" "Lena and Dune," cried Torin. "Someone has to go and rescue them." "Rescue them?" said Mrs. Murdo. "From what? Lena's down at the hotel." Maddie came in the back door and gazed calmly at this gathering. She held a basket in one hand that looked to be full of weeds. She said. "What's going on?" "I was the one who figured out where they went," said Lizzie, "after Kenny said where they had gone." "Gone?" said Mrs. Murdo, looking more and more confused. "I want some now," Poppy whined. Torin jumped up and down in front of Mrs. Murdo. "The shepherd told us," he shouted. "Lena's up there, and Dune is too. They have to be rescued." At that point, Mrs. Murdo put her hands on her hips and looked stern. "All right," she said. "I'm missing something. Anyone want to explain?" Poppy started to cry. "What's the matter with Poppy?" Lizzie asked Miss Murdo. "She's hungry," Mrs. Murdo said. "I've taken the last of the olive oil and was just frying a few potatoes, and she can't wait to have some." "Maybe we could all have some," Lizzie said. So they crowded in front of the fire, eating fried potatoes. There were just enough for 3 slices each. And Kenny and Lizzie and Torin told their story, all of them interrupting each other and talking in a great urgent rush. Mrs. Murdo looked more and more horrified, and by the time they were finished, she was clutching the arms of her chair and glaring at them. "The town leaders need to know about this right away." She stood up and glared at Kenny and Torin and Lizzie. "You 3, she said, "come with me." All that afternoon, Dune had slept and Lena had sat beside him, thoughts swirling through her mind of all that had happened in the short time, not even 3 whole days, since they'd set out on their trip. They had left the door of the room partway open. Light came in, and chilly air, and a few flying bugs, but no sound of animals or human beings. At about midday, Lena got out more of the food from Mags, and they both ate. Then Dune slept again. Finally, the daylight began to wane, and the trees outside became a tangle of shadows. It grew colder, too, and Lena knew they'd have to prepare for the night, make the fire, eat the last of their food. She woke Dune to look at his ankle and was shocked at how swollen and dark it was, like a big purple fruit. "I should be able to walk fine tomorrow," Dune said, but his voice was full of doubt. He sat up and leaned against the wall. "I can't stop thinking about the diamond," he said. "But you don't know what it was," said Lena. "No, but I looked underneath it, just for a second, when I came out of the cave, and I saw wires. It reminded me of when I used to take plugs apart in Ember to see how electricity worked. Wires were inside them." "So maybe it was a light," said Lena. "But still, one light? I don't see why that would have made much of a difference to anything." "Maybe not," said Dune. "But the strange thing is, it was here, right next to the way out of Ember, waiting for us. It was meant for us. Just like... He stopped. Lena thought he was too upset to finish his sentence, but the look on his face changed. The sad, heavy look went away, and a look of surprise took its place. With his mouth hanging open and his eyebrows lifted up, Dune stayed speechless, as if suddenly turned to stone. "What?" Lena finally said. "Just like what?" "Just like the boat in the room," said Dune. "There was one boat, remember? And we thought, why just one boat for all the people in the city?" "Yes, and we were wrong because really, that was just a sample. And once you found the secret door, there were lots of boats," Lena said. "But you had to know how to find them," Dune cried. "You mean there might be more?" Lena asked. "More diamonds?" "There might," cried Dune. "We have to try." He struggled to stand up, moving so fast that he turned his injured ankle and said, "Yow!" very loudly, and just barely managed to stay on his feet. "There was a steel panel in the boat room in Ember," he said, "and inside it a key. But I don't see anything like that here, do you?" "No," said Lena. She lit a candle, because the light from outside was nearly gone, and walked with it around the edges of the room. The walls looked perfectly smooth to her. There was nowhere for a key to be hidden, and no keyhole to put it in. "The instructions would have been in the book," said Dune. "If that shepherd hadn't burned up the pages. Let's try anyhow." He placed his hands on the wall behind him and ran them up, sideways, and down. Lena jumped. She stood the candle in a blob of its own melted wax in the middle of the room. "What are we looking for?" "Anything that's different from the rest," Dune said. "A dent, a bump, I don't know." They patted their hands over the entire rear wall of the room. If this was like the boat room, the rear wall was the one that should lead somewhere. Lena set up the table and stood on it to reach the high parts, and Dune did the low parts by scooching along the floor. But every inch of the wall, as far as they could tell, felt the same, smooth and hard. So they moved on to the side walls. They pressed harder. Frustrated, they banged with their fists in a few places, thinking maybe they'd shake something loose. But the room stayed the same. No panels opened, no doors slid aside. At last, they set themselves to go over the wall where the entrance was. They were tired by now and losing hope, but they kept on. And after a while, Lena thought she felt a very slight seam in the wall. It was just to the left of the doorway. "This might be something," she said. "Feel it." Dune felt where she pointed. "Yes, just a hair of a crack. Try pressing beside it." Lena pressed. Dune put his hand next to hers, and they both pressed. And a small, flat door sprang open, startling them both so much that they stumbled backward. "Got it!" cried Dune, who had sat down hard on the floor. He struggled up, standing mostly on one foot. Lena was peering inside the opening, and Dune looked over her shoulder. What they saw was simply a handle, set vertically in the box opening. To the left, the word "off" was printed, and to the right, the word "on." "Shall I do it?" said Lena. Dune nodded. She gripped the handle and pulled it to the right. It moved stiffly, but there was a satisfying click when it locked into place. And then came a grinding, a creaking, and the walls began to move. They jumped away and stared. On both sides of them, solid panels were sliding upward, revealing, all down the length of the room, shelves built within the walls from floor to ceiling. And on the shelves, lined up in neat rows, were blue diamonds exactly like the one that Dune had broken. "Dozens of them," Lena breathed. "Hundreds," said Dune. "They're so beautiful." In the light of the single candle, the diamonds glimmered softly, blue as the evening sky before the stars come out. "Our diamonds," whispered Dune. "The diamonds meant for the people of Ember." He gazed at them, his eyes gleaming. "Now," he said, "if only we knew what they were for." End of chapter 22. I miss these Thursday streams. I have to head into my meeting. Have a great rest of stream. Car, good luck with your meeting. I'm sure you're already in it now, but hopefully it goes well. I'm doing a little stretch. I like to get a stretch in between all the chapters. It helps wake me up. It helps keep me going. Ugh. I forgot I existed. You should get paid for this Audible Who. Oh my god. Jackie, I would love to read for like a job. It would be so awesome. I did look into it at one point. Well, not reading, but I did look into like editing, because I love like grammar too. But I do love reading books to people. So that would honestly be awesome. I know somebody who does that. She used to actually be one of my high school teachers. And she actually reads or narrates audiobooks now, which is pretty cool. I don't know how I could do a whole book without messing up, though, because I do mess up sometimes, but I try to just kind of keep going and not make it super obvious. Hi, Luna. Hi. Oh, you don't want me. It's fine. Okay. But let's keep going. I want to try to I do want to try to finish today because that would be super awesome. So let's keep reading chapter 23, Home Alive. The 3 town leaders, Mary, Ben, and Wilmer, were not pleased to learn that Lena and Dune had gone out into the wilderness and needed to be rescued. At a time like this, Ben Barlow remarked sourly, wandering off on some cracked-brain adventure and getting yourself kidnapped was a truly unhelpful thing to do. In fact, he said, it was almost criminal. In the circumstances, and when the 2 troublemakers were brought home, they should be given an appropriate punishment. Nevertheless, everyone agreed that the children would have to be found. So Mary and Ben conferred with Mrs. Murdo about how it should be done. They decided to take one of the smaller, lighter of the town's wagons, one that could be drawn by a younger, speedier ox. Mary would drive the wagon. Dune's father insisted on going, even though Dr. Hester had told him the cut in his hand was infected and he'd have to have his bandage changed and the wound cleaned at least twice a day. Because of that, and in case Dune or Lena needed medical care, the doctor would of course go on the journey too. At the last minute, Lizzie, to her delight, was asked to come along, because she was the person from Ember who had most recently been up in that direction. They would leave first thing in the morning, and they would take food and shelter and blankets with them, along with fire-making materials. Dr. Hester packed a bag of first aid supplies, bandages, ointments, and splints. When morning came, they set out, only Lizzie feeling the least bit cheerful. The morning was cold but clear, and the ground less soft than it had been before, which made for easier travel. Lizzie stood in the wagon bed right behind Mary, who held the reins, and kept her informed about which way to go. "We went up on this side of the squash field," she said, "and then up the hill in that direction. Then, when you get to the top of the hill, you'll probably see one of the red flags that Kenny put down. After that, you have to—" "Thank you, Lizzie," Mary said. "No need to tell me the whole trip at once. Just say something now and then to keep us on the right track." So Lizzie kept more or less quiet, except for absolutely necessary remarks, such as mentioning the first red flag when it appeared up ahead, or when she had to point out the mitten-shaped clump of trees that they had tried to make it to yesterday. She went back to the thoughts she'd had before, the pictures in her mind of how, when they found Dune, she would run to him and discover that he was hurt and be the one to know what to do, and he would realize how really special she was, and the ox trudged on, and the wagon bumped along after it, over stony ground and clumps of grass, uphill and down, always heading northeast toward the mountains. The sun reached the midday point and began the descent into afternoon. Lizzie sat down in the back of the wagon. She brushed her hair. She'd brought her hairbrush with her, along with 2 spare ribbons and 3 scarves. And then, feeling sleepy, she rested her arms on her raised knees and put her head down on them. This was pleasant, because again, she'd rubbed her wrists with lavender, and she was drifting off into a dreamy doze when Dune's father gave a sudden shout. "Look," he cried. "Someone's out there. Mary, stop the wagon for a moment." Lizzie jolted awake and leapt to her feet as the wagon slowed and halted. "Where?" she said. June's father was standing too, pointing north and east with his club-like bandaged hand. "Way out there," he said. "All I see is a dot, but it's moving. Might be an animal, I guess, but I don't think so." They all strained to see it. Whatever it was moved in fits and starts, slowly. "Could it be a cow?" said Dr. Hester. Mary shook her head. "Maybe a deer," she said, "or a coyote?" They stayed there, watching, for a few more minutes. Lizzie squinted hard at the moving dot, pressing her blowing hair to her head with both hands to keep it out of her eyes. "Let's head towards it," said Mary. The ox heaved forward, and the wagon's wheels turned. And when they had traveled for another 10 minutes or so, they were sure that the dot in the distance was not an animal. It was not a person either. It was 2 people, walking close together, holding on to each other. Lizzie screamed, "It's them!" And Dune's father and Dr. Hester called, "Dune and Lena," at the same time, and the 2 people, though they were still far away, must have realized who was coming, because each one flung an arm into the air and waved like mad. Dune did have a wound, but Lizzie did not get to tend to it after all. Lena had already done that, and Dr. Hester said she'd done an excellent job. When they got back to Sparks late that night, and the doctor undid the scarf that Lena had wrapped around Dune's leg, and Lizzie saw the blotchy purple swelling, she felt a little ill and was glad she hadn't had to deal with it just after it happened. She wasn't even jealous that Lena had been the one to save him. She'd sort of forgotten all about those rescuing visions as soon as she'd seen the 2 of them limping toward the wagon, weary and lame and smudged with dirt. They were both her friends, and she was glad that they'd come home alive. End of chapter 23. HS, welcome in. Happy Thursday. Lurking while I do some new software training at work. Ooh, exciting. Thank you for the lurk. And enjoy the training. Hopefully it's not too bad. I'll get another little stretch in. I can't wait to see how this book ends. It's so exciting because like I've been saying, the first book and this book are definitely my favorites, and we're almost to the end of this one, and it's the last book of the series, so it's like the end of the end, which is kind of like, it's sad, but it's also exciting. And I can't wait to start the next reading series, which technically I've already started, because the next one I wanted to read, or rather record off stream so that I can just post it to YouTube, and just to kind of see a difference between reading on stream versus reading without, distractions, interruptions, chatty bits, anything like that. So if you aren't subscribed to my YouTube, go check it out. All my past streams are up there, as well as all the reading streams. So definitely check it out if you want to see. Even my very first stream, like 5 years ago, is up there. Not that you want to see that, but it's there. So, without further ado, let's keep going. Chapter 24, The Salvage Expedition. That night, no one asked many questions of Lena and Dune, seeing how exhausted they were. But the next morning, the town leaders gathered at the doctor's house, along with Dune and his father, and they wanted information. Mary asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Dune, she said, you went into your old city, you say. Did you actually find useful things there? Food? Things we might use for trade? Yes, said Dune. There's enough to help us through the winter. I'm sure there is. And there's also... He glanced at Lena, who met his eyes with an almost unnoticeable smile. I mean, there's a lot. We have to go and bring things back. Why should we believe you? Ben Barlow said. You've caused a great deal of trouble already, and this jaunt out into the wilderness might just be more of the same. Dune's father gave Ben a hard look. Why shouldn't you believe him? He said. Has he not proved himself reliable in the past? He has, Ben, said Mary. I think we can trust what he says. Wilmer pulled nervously at his ear. Didn't you say people are living there? Yes, said Dune, but I think they'll be gone very soon. If we can bring back enough to ease our troubles, said Mary, we should go. So it was decided. Many people volunteered for the expedition, curious to see this underground city they'd heard about, and preparations commenced. Everyone pitched in. The candle makers worked overtime. Trucks and wagons were oiled and repaired. Every spare sack and barrel and crate was found. Tools and ropes and food supplies were gathered. The plan was to leave in a week, if the weather held. On the second day of that week, after they'd spent a day sleeping and resting and eating, Dune and Lena met in an attic room in the Pioneer Hotel, a place that must once have been used for storing old furniture and cleaning supplies. It was a dusty, musty place with cobwebs hanging from the rafters, but it had a window that looked out across the field in front of the hotel toward the river and let in a strong light they could see by. Their plan was to study in secret the diamond that Dune had brought back. They wanted to show it to no one until they knew what it was. They discovered one thing right away. At the base of the diamond, within the circle of its gold collar, was a ridged hollow that looked like a socket for a light bulb. And indeed, when Dune found a bulb and screwed it in, it fit perfectly. But it didn't light up. He tried moving something near the socket that looked like a switch, but still nothing happened. Was this because the bulb was burned out? Or because the switch didn't work? Or what? But in any case, they could see that you could put in a light bulb, stand the diamond on its top, and if the bulb lit up, you'd have some kind of lamp. They puzzled through the book of 8 pages for clues. Lena sat on the floor by the window with a book on her lap, the dusty sunlight coming over her shoulder. Dune sat next to her with the diamond, which shimmered as the light hit it, but stubbornly kept its secret. I don't see anything in the book that we haven't already gone over, Lena said. There's just this on the page at the end. It looks like it really is the last page of the book. I mean, there aren't any ripped pages after it. There's a half sentence at the top, I guess continued from the page before, which isn't there. It says, celestial source, perfectly pure, and for human purposes infinite. What does celestial mean, I wonder, said June. And infinite. He scrutinized the diamond's underside again, holding it up into the light so he could see. Besides the socket for the bulb and the switch, there were wires within the diamond's collar that looked as if they could be uncoiled. Carefully, he pulled them out, but he couldn't tell what he was supposed to do with them. He tucked them back in again. He felt unbearably frustrated. This beautiful, strange object, which seemed to be a light, left by the builders for the people of Ember, he held it in his hands, but couldn't make it work. In Ember, lights worked by electricity, and electricity was right there in the walls of the houses. You put a plug into a socket, and the electricity came through. But this light had no plug, unless there was one that Trog had lost, and even if there had been, there was nothing here in Sparks to plug it into. So how did the diamond get its power? They found the answer a short time later. They didn't know at first why they'd found it. All they knew was that the light suddenly worked. But in the next few days, as they did one experiment after another, and casually asked Mrs. Bullaware, the schoolteacher, for some word definitions, they began to understand. And once they understood, they made their plan. During that week, Torn was in a state of unbearable excitement. Thrilling and mysterious things were going on all around him, and at last he was part of it, not left out. Or at least, not completely left out. He'd helped to rescue Lena and Dune, and he would be going on the expedition. Sometimes, though, he had the feeling there were things he wasn't being told. Lena had the look of someone with a secret, a happy one. She hummed a lot, and often when Torn was talking to her, she didn't pay attention, as if she was thinking about something else. Dune and his father came up to the doctor's house one day. While Dune's father was having his hand treated by the doctor, Dune and Lena went into a corner and talked together in whispery voices. Torn tried to lurk around nearby and overhear them, but Lena shooed him away. After that, Dune wanted to see Torn's treasures, so Torn got them out of the trunk where he kept them and lined them up. The airplane, the elephant, the remote, the box of light bulbs. They're great, Dune said. He tapped the box of light bulbs. How many are in here? 48, said Torn proudly. Well, no, 47, because you took one for your generator. That's right, Dune said. You're lucky to have them. Someday they might come in handy. At last, the day of the departure arrived. The morning dawned chilly but clear. All those who would be making the trip gathered in the plaza. They swarmed around, toting empty bags and boxes to bring things back in, loading them onto 4 trucks, hitching up oxen, and all the time calling out to each other in loud or anxious or excited voices. Ben Barlow strode around, making sure that only people going were good walkers, since there wouldn't be room for anyone to ride on the trucks on the way back, except for Dune because of his injured ankle. Mary Waters reminded people to follow the lead of those from Ember, who knew where they were going, and Wilmer Dent fussed with the buttons on his coat, looking nervous. "Where's Dune?" Torn asked Lena. "He's coming," she said, but she looked a little worried, scanning the crowd and not finding him, and very relieved when at the last minute he came into the plaza, red in the face from hurrying, still limping a little, and carrying a bulky pack on his back. Mary gave the order. "Let's go," she cried, and with squeaks and rattles from the trucks and the bawling of the oxen, the caravan headed up the north road, around the far edge of the squash field, and up into the hills. They traveled all day, and at nightfall they reached a sheltered valley where they made camp for the night. Another day of travel, and by the evening of the next day, they'd arrived at the cave entrance. The last of the sunlight came at a slant, throwing shadows eastward across the grass. The caravan halted, and everyone gathered around and stared at the arched opening in the wall at the mountainside. It didn't look very big or grand, not like the entrance to a city. "That's where we came out of Ember," Dune shouted to them, standing up on the lead wagon. "And up around there," he pointed to the right, "is where we go in." But they'd need to spend another night in the open first and go down into the city in the morning. The trucks were lined up to make a barrier against the wind, and people scattered out across the hillside to break the low, dead branches from trees for their fires. Soon, orange flames leapt into the darkness like waving hands. Torin lay awake a long time that night. He was thinking that this was how it would be to be a roamer, except you'd be out here all alone in the wilderness, and you'd have to make your own fire. And how would you sleep if you had to keep watch against wolves? It seemed hard. Maybe he'd decide to be something else. Next morning, the wind was finally down, and the air was a little warmer. Everyone rose early, eager to get started, just as the last stars were fading from the sky. But there were things to do before the descent into the city. People needed to eat, and they needed to get organized. And Lena and Dune had put into action, or tried to, the plan that they'd kept secret from everyone. Now that they were here, about to make all this happen, Lena felt a fluttering in her stomach, and Dune realized that his heart was thumping a little faster. While everyone was eating breakfast, Dune turned to Lena. "Let's go," he said quietly. He picked up his backpack, and he and Lena walked together behind the wagons and headed for the grove of trees. End of chapter 24. We're getting so close. I think we're going to finish today. I really do. There's only 3 chapters left, and we still have like an hour of reading time, so I definitely think we're going to finish. Which is super exciting. I can't wait. I just want to keep going. I just want to keep going. But let me get my in-between stretch. Get us prepared for the next chapter. Okay. Chapter 25. Light for the Journey. The door to the windowless room was just as they had left it, propped open about an inch with a stick. Inside, Dune set his backpack on the small table, which they'd stood upright when they were here before, and reached inside. He brought out a light bulb. "The reason I was late getting to the plaza the day we left," he said, "was that I had to wait till Torin was out of the house so I could go in and get these. And then I had to wrap them all up in Dr. Hester's rags and bandages so they wouldn't clink against each other in my pack and break. It took longer than I thought it would." "But you got them all?" Lena asked. "I did. So here we go." Once again, they opened the small door in the wall and moved the handle, and once again, the panels slid upward and revealed the rows of diamonds. "Now," said Dune, "we need to get one working." Gingerly, he lifted a diamond from the lowest shelf. He carried it outside, along with one of the light bulbs. Lena followed. They found a clearing among the trees, and Dune placed the diamond on the ground, in the full light of the sun, standing it upright on its collar of golden metal. "Now we wait," Dune said. They sat down on a fallen tree, side by side. They heard the voices of the people of Sparks in the distance, cheerful and excited. A bird hopped in the branches above their heads, making a tiny pip-pip sound, answered by another pip-pip farther off. A cloud of gnats danced in the sunlight. The blue diamonds sat there, unchanged. They waited some more. "Is it time?" Lena said at last. "I think so." They stood up. Dune picked up the diamond and turned it over. He screwed in a light bulb, flicked the switch, and the bulb lit up. It shone with the brilliance of 100 candles, blasting their faces with light. Then they ran, Dune carrying the diamond with its shining light bulb high above his head, back to where the people stood eating their breakfasts on the mountainside. "Look!" Dune shouted, and Lena shouted too. "Look, everyone!" People dropped their food and stared. Voices rang out from everywhere. "What is it? Where did it come from?" "Is it magic?" someone called. "No, not magic," said Dune. "It's electricity." "Electricity?" yelled Torin. "Like with your generator?" Everyone crowded around. They gawked at the shining light bulb. A miracle. Its steady beam bright even in the morning sun. "But I don't get it," Kenny said. "What makes it shine?" "It makes electricity from sunlight," said Dune. "No," said Ben Barlow, craning his head forward and frowning. "Impossible." "And yet there it is," said Mary Waters. Dune's father spoke up. "Son," he said, "you brought this thing out of nowhere. How did you find it? How did you know about it? I think you need to explain." So Dune and Lena explained together, telling the whole story, or almost the whole story. They left out the part about the wolves. Telling that, they knew, would only cause trouble. Mrs. Murdo would have nightmares about it. Dune's father would be aghast at the terrible risks they'd taken. The villagers might want to go after the wolves and kill them, though the wolves were only doing what all creatures do, trying to stay alive. So Lena and Dune did not mention those moments of terror and danger. They kept that part of the story to themselves. Like a dark stone that was the secret partner of the bright jewel that they'd brought back. People wanted to touch the diamond and examine it. Hands reached out, shoulders bumped. Ben pushed through, saying, "Make way, please, I need to see this." And Wilmer Dent edged in sideways, and Lizzie said, "We had electricity in Ember. Everybody had it." But Dune backed away. "Wait," he cried. "We have to get started. We don't have much time." From his bulging pack, he extracted the box of light bulbs that he'd borrowed from Torin. Torin shrieked, "Those are mine!" "Yes," said Dune, "and you'll be proud to know they're going to be used for something so important." Lena and Dune climbed up onto one of the trucks. Raising their voices so everyone could hear, they took turns explaining what the scavengers should expect when they went down into Ember. The narrow path that led along the cave wall, the unknown regions, and the chasm. They'd be laying a sturdier bridge across it with planks and pipes brought from Sparks. "We'll know right away if people are still there," Dune said, "because we'll see their fire. But I think they've probably gone already." He explained that there would be search teams, each one led by former citizens of Ember. The teams would go to all the different neighborhoods, collect anything useful, and pile it in certain spots. The team led by Dune and his father would go down into the pipeworks. Lena and Lizzie would lead a team to the storerooms. Clary Lane would lead a team to Ember's greenhouses, where she had been the manager, and Edward's team would check the library and the school. Other teams would cover the rest of the city. The search would go on for about 8 hours. Dune chose Martha Parton to keep track of the time by burning 8 candles, one after another, in Harkin Square. Privately, he hoped that the Trogs might have left their hourglass behind, but he couldn't count on that. At the end of 8 hours, Martha would blow 3 blasts on a loud whistle. Then the teams would carry all that they'd collected back through the unknown regions, put things into packs, carry them up to the top, and load them into the trucks to be taken back to Sparks. It took nearly an hour to make the preparations. Dune gave each of the team leaders a diamond and a light bulb, and each person stood his or her diamond in the sun and waited while it soaked up light. Dune had tested this back in Sparks. In about 15 minutes, a diamond could take in a charge that would last at least 8 hours. Meanwhile, Lena, who had brought along a ball of string, cut short lengths of it and passed them out to all those who would be leading the search teams. She also gave each person several sacks, which they'd use for collecting, as well as a few candles, just in case any of the light bulbs failed. She and Dune had brought with them all the matches they'd saved from their trip. When enough time had gone by, people screwed in their light bulbs, flicked their switches, and jumped and yelped and laughed gleefully as the bulbs lit up. Maddie, who wasn't one for jumping and laughing, gave one of her rare smiles. "So," she said, "Casper's ridiculous long quest had one good result after all. Now tie one end of the string around the ring," Lena said, "and the other to your belt. That way you can carry the light and leave your hands free." It worked pretty well for a plan made up on the basis of so little knowledge. Dune and Lena led people the short distance up the slope to the crack in the mountainside. The two of them went in first, carrying only Dune's small generator. Once they were standing on the ledge, Dune stopped cranking, and they looked down. No light, not even the faintest glow. "They've left," said Dune and Lena. "Good." They began the process of leading nearly 100 people down the long, narrow path along the cave wall. Their diamond lights lit the way far better than the candles, but still the going was hard, and many people were terrified. There were shrieks from those who tripped on a rock or stumbled too close to the path's edge, and wails from those who were overcome by fear of the long descent into darkness. But at last, the whole troop trudged out across the unknown regions, crept and tottered and screamed their way across the bridge over the chasm, and entered the city. The stink of old smoke filled the air. The teams took a few minutes to organize themselves and recover from the ordeal of the descent, and then they spread out, moving through the streets to their assigned neighborhoods. For hour after hour, they poked into every room, hall, and stairway, every cupboard and cabinet, every nook and cranny, collecting what was useful and leaving what was not. It was a thorough search, but not a quick one. The former citizens of Ember were constantly seized by memories and often insisted on going blocks out of their way to visit the house they lived in or the place where they'd worked to pick up some small treasure they'd left behind. And the people of Sparks were so astonished by the city that they asked a million questions and sometimes just came to a halt and stared. But as the hours went by, the search grew more businesslike. The conversations dwindled and the side trips ceased. At various corners through the city, piles of useful things grew higher and higher. Clary's team, out in the greenhouses, gathered seeds of several kinds of beets and greens and squashes unknown to the farmers of Sparks. Edward's team found, to his great distress, that the Ember Library had been emptied out, but the 3 books in Miss Thorne's old schoolroom remained: the Book of Letters, the Book of Numbers, and the Great Book of the City of Ember. No one could say that these were really useful, but they took them anyhow to remember the city by. Dune's team, down in the pipeworks, wound through the tunnels to the mayor's secret room, from which, as Dune had discovered, the mayor and his cronies had had no time to remove very much on that last frantic day. Stacks of cans, boxes of light bulbs, and cartons of supplies still stood there, surrounding the mayor's armchair, his table, and his plate spotted with moldy bits of food. Dune remembered what Mrs. Murdo had said about seeing bulging bags on the walkway beside the river as the mayor was trying to escape. His team retrieved those too, just carrying all these things back through the tunnels and up the long, long pipework stairway took that team all the hours of the search. Dune had thought there might be time for him to go back to his old home and look for his book of insect drawings, but at the end he decided against it. The world above was so full of wonderful insects that he could simply start a new book. It would be far better than the old one. Lena's team found very little in the storerooms. As the Emberites had known, the city's supplies had been nearly gone. A few rooms held forgotten boxes of safety pins and rolls of crusty string and tins of salt, and there were some cans of food, mostly spinach, and some boxes of electrical cords and plugs. Lizzie found a stray pair of pink socks that she claimed for herself. Most of the other stuff was broken or spoiled and not worth taking. But Dune had told Lena what Yorick said about the back room of the shop, where someone had been hoarding. Lena was sure she knew which shop it was. She'd brought her colored pencils there. It was the shop run by the young man named Looper, who had been the mayor's crony in the theft from the storerooms. He'd also been Lizzie's boyfriend, and when she saw the piles of things he collected, she sputtered with indignation. "He told me he was just taking a little," she said. "What a liar! How could I ever have liked him?" There were cans of food, boxes of paper and pencils, even colored pencils, Lena saw with delight, packets of soap, and still more light bulbs. About halfway through the search, it was decided that some of the teams should stop searching and start toting things up to the surface. Dune's father, who wasn't able to carry things because of his hand, supervised this, sending some people to collect things from the various piles and bring them to the edge of the unknown regions, and other people to fill their packs and start up the path. It was a very long day. Legs and backs grew weary. People had to take rests, sitting on the benches in Harkin Square. Lena began checking back more and more often with Martha Parton, who was sitting on the steps of the gathering hall, keeping track of the time by burning candles. When only a few minutes remained before the search had to end, Lena left Lizzie in charge of her team and slipped away. First, she ran across Harkin Square, skirting the back rubble that was the remains of the Trog's bonfire, to the house in Quilliam Square, where she and Poppy had lived with their grandmother, to see if she could find the drawings she had done of the bright city of her imagination. She shone her light on the walls where she'd pinned them up, but they weren't there. In the bathroom cabinet, though, she found the almost empty tube of the medicine called Anti-B. She put that in her pocket. Then she ran back to Harkin Square and climbed the steps of the gathering hall. She went along the corridor into the mayor's office, through the door that led to the stairs, and up the stairs to the roof. Once more, for the last time, she looked out. The city looked as she had never seen it before, dotted with bright, moving lights, one here, one there, wherever the search teams were at work. Lights never used to move in Ember. The only light came from the giant floodlights fixed to buildings and the lamps in people's houses. Now all those were dark, and instead the lights of the searchers flitted like luminous insects along the streets and within the windows. Martha's whistle blew, 3 long blasts. As Lena watched, more and more bright dots emerged from buildings. Moving along the streets toward the collection piles, swarmed out for a bit, and then joined a stream of lights, all moving in the same direction, as people headed with their bounty out toward the meeting place at the edge of the unknown regions. "Goodbye, Ember," Lena said. She said it out loud, as if the city could hear her. "Goodbye forever this time, my city." Then she went down the stairs and out into the streets again to rejoin the expedition. She found Dune standing beside the white rocking chair, guiding people into the line that led out toward the cliff. "We won't see Ember again," said Dune. "No," Lena said, "but it's all right. I said goodbye." End of chapter 25. 2 more chapters to go. And welcome in, Terror. Happy Thursday. Electricity sounds like witchcraft. Burn the witch. You know what? Maybe it is. Maybe it is. But you did show up just in time for Terror and Danger getting mentioned. Perfect timing, as always. The Book of Letters, the Book of Numbers, and the Karma Sutra. That was hidden. That book was secretly in the library and got burned from the trogs not knowing what it was. Pink socks, Mooch the cat would love that. Who's Mooch the cat? Who's Mooch the cat? I like cats. We only have 2 more chapters to go. Oh, hang on 1 second. I need to reply to this text. Okay. Okay. Bad news bears. Not for you guys, just for me. Whoa, back up. You like cats? You know, how could anyone know that? How could anyone know that? Mooch the cat is the cat from a comic strip called Mutts, a cute little comic strip about a dog named Earl and a cat named Mooch. Oh my gosh, I never heard of it. I used to look at the comic strips in the newspapers back when people actually cared about newspapers. And that's the only part I would look at is the comics. My favorite was always Peanuts. So that's really the only comic that I cared about. But I did see some of the other ones. Like, what's that one with the kid and his, like, tiger? I remember that one. And the other one about the, like, guy who worked at, and he was, like, at a desk. I don't remember any of the names. I just remember what they look like. But, alright. It's getting down to it. I'm getting excited. Only 2 more chapters. Let's see how many pages. About a little less than 20 pages left, so we got this. We got this. Mooch often would play with and sing a little song that just went, Little Pink Sock. Oh, Little Pink Shock. Okay. That's funny. That's funny. Or is it supposed to be sock? Either way, I like it. Calvin and Hobbes and Dilbert. Yep, you got it, Tara. You got it. I'm glad my descriptions worked. But yes, I do remember those comics. I think we had a book about Calvin and Hobbes. I don't know, for some reason I like picture that in our house growing up. I just remember the kid and his tiger. I didn't actually read the comic. I just remember it. And the Dilbert one was funny sometimes. I'm sure it would be more funny now that I've had, like, desk jobs and office jobs and things like that. But when I was little, I just remember, like, oh, this guy is sitting in a suit at his job. Boring. As a kid, you think that's boring. Peanuts was always good. Yes, yes. I think I even had cut out one of the peanuts strips and had put it on my bedroom wall because I liked it so much. I don't think I have it now anymore. It's long gone, but I thought it was a nice one, so I kept it. I kept a lot of things. Now I'm realizing as I'm older that do not keep everything. Do not keep everything. It's not worth it. All right, let's keep going. Only 2 chapters left. We got this. We need to find out how everything ends. So here we go. My current favorite ongoing strip is Pearls Before Swine. Oh, I don't know that one. I'll have to look it up. Chapter 26. An Interesting Arrival. The food from Ember was enough to get the people of Sparks through the last hard weeks of the winter. It made for a rather odd diet sometimes. No one in Sparks had ever eaten canned spinach, or powdered milk, or vitamin pills, but they were glad to have them, and glad to have the other things that had been scarce, like rubber boots and seeds for the spring. Everyone spent those weeks being a little bit hungry most of the time, but there were no conflicts, and no one starved. Later on, when the ground had dried, several trucks went up again to bring the rest of the diamonds back to Sparks. It turned out that there were 1,000 of them in the windowless room, stacked on long shelves in alcoves that stretched back into the mountain. Each household was given 2, and the rest were carefully stored in the Ark, which now had a rebuilt roof. These would belong not to any one person, but to the town. And the town as a whole would decide how to use them. Their very first decision was to use some of them for trade. A team went to the nearby settlement of Stonefield with 3 diamonds, and they returned with an entire truckload of corn, flour, dried beans, slightly sprouted potatoes, and almond butter, which happened to be Stonefield's specialty. The diamonds caused other changes in Sparks as well. They gave rise to a new routine, for one thing. Every morning, even when the weather was cloudy, people put their diamonds outside to soak up sun, for an hour or so every day. The glitter of blue glass adorned gardens and fence rails and front steps. The candlemaker's business declined quite a bit. He had to branch out into making floor wax and wagon grease. Fewer fires started as a result of toppled candles, and people lit their way through the town easily at night, even in windy weather. The diamonds allowed people to work on tasks like knitting and sewing in the evenings, and to read. Only a few weeks after the expedition to Ember, they had a real library to read in. Several people helped Edward build an extension onto the back of the Ark and line it with bookshelves, and Edward set up 5 tables in there, each one with a diamond in the middle providing light. Quite a number of people came in the evenings to browse among the books. Even Kenny, who thought he didn't care for reading, found that he liked looking at one book in which there were pictures of astonishing animals. Striped horses, spotted things with stretched necks, a giant pig-like creature with a horn on its nose. Edward became known to the roamers in the area as someone who would buy books of almost any kind. After a roamer's visit, the library was sometimes actually crowded with people stopping in to see what was new. Loris Harrow's injured hand continued to bother him for weeks. Finally, Dr. Hester decided there must be still bits of glass in the wound. She gave Loris some of her best pain medicine, which wasn't very good, and he clenched his teeth as she opened the wound again, this time under the bright light provided by 2 diamonds, and cleaned out the splinters once and for all. One warm afternoon, when the last of winter had gone, a whole family of roamers came into town from the south. They were a wreck. Their truck was a rusty heap with a filthy flapping canvas covering the back. They had 1 scrawny ox, one scrawny horse, and a flock of sheep that looked as if they'd been rolling around in the dirt. The roamers themselves looked as mangy as their sheep. Matted hair, ragged, dirty clothes. Gradually, as the news of the roamers' arrival spread through town, people gathered in the plaza to see them. A murmur of disappointment ran through the crowd when the sorry-looking troop appeared. The man who seemed to be their leader was a short, stocky person with wild hair springing from every part of him. He wore a pair of big, square-rimmed glasses, though anyone could see that the frames were empty, because a few of his eyebrow bristles poked right through. He jumped onto a stack of boxes and began his spiel in a loud, growly voice. "Come and look," he cried. "Bring your best goods, because you'll see what we have, what you want. Unusual items, things never seen before. Gather round." Dune had come into town that day to pick up some leftover scraps of lumber from the old town hall. Lena was at the bakery buying bread. When the roamers came into the plaza and the man began to shout, both of them felt a jolt, as if they'd been suddenly struck by a flying stone, and they turned from their tasks and saw that they were right. The Trogs had come to Sparks. Dune spotted Lena coming out of the bakery and waved urgently at her. She saw him right away and hurried toward him through the growing crowd. "It's them, isn't it?" she said. Dune nodded. The sight of the Trogs was doing strange things to his stomach and stirring up unpleasant thoughts in his mind. "That woman is the roamer who sold you the book," said Lena. "That's Mags, the shepherd, Trogs' sister. She looks even worse than before." "And that thin, sad-looking boy with the twisted leg is Skago," said Dune. Seeing Skago struck him with a special pain. It was a complicated pain. Sadness that he hadn't been able to rescue Skago, as well as gratitude for Skago's help. He hoped Skago had not had to take the blame for the diamond's disappearance. "Step up," Trog shouted. "Look, I have canned corn and canned greens. It's from the ancient days, and yet just as good as when it was cooked. I have 37 pairs of eyeglasses. I have sweaters, I have mittens, I have shoes for babies. I have 4 bottles of cough medicine, only partly used." People pressed a little closer. Lena whispered to Dune, "Are you going to say something to him?" Dune's thoughts felt like moths fluttering in his head. What to do? Speak out against Trog? Dash up and snatch Skago away? "I have bags of wool," Trog called. "Good for stuffing pillows. Good for weaving. You'll need it for next winter, when that blasted cold weather comes again." He heaved 3 fat bags from the back of the truck and plunked them down. "Nice fluffy wool," said Mags. "No burrs in it, no dirt." "I don't believe that," Lena whispered. "Also useful rain jackets." Mags held up a garment that looked very much like the covering of her old wagon, patched together from crinkled old pieces of plastic. "I made them myself." "Step right up," called Trog, "and offer me some good trades for these exceptional wares. Especially welcome would be the fire lighting gadgets I know you have in this town. Matches. Special deals for those with matches." People sighed and shrugged and shook their heads. They wouldn't get those special deals because the town had no matches. They'd used the last one just a few weeks ago. Dune felt a stab of a very unexpected emotion. He felt sorry for Trog, who thought he knew everything. Trog had had the key to light and power in his hands, but it did him no good, because he didn't know what it was. The trading would start soon. Dune still wasn't sure exactly what he was going to do, but he knew he had to make himself known to the Trogs and to Skago. He had to speak up. He turned to Lena. I'm going up there." He edged between the people in the crowd until he came to the front, and then he stood as tall as he could and called out, "Washton Trog." Trog jerked his head up. He spotted Dune instantly. His mouth opened as if he were going to speak, but there was a long pause before he did. Kanza and Yorick made noises of surprise in that pause. Minnie wailed, and Skago cried out, "Dune!" in his high, wavery voice. But Trog just glared for a long moment. Then his eyebrows came down like storm clouds, and his face scrunched into a scowl. "Thief!" he shouted. "Sneaking, treacherous thief!" The crowd of villagers went silent, except for a few people at the back, saying, "What? Why is he shouting? What's going on?" "It's true," Dune said. "I stole from you. And after I was so good to you, taking you into my own family." Trog was purple with rage. He shook his hairy fist at Dune. "Traitor! Ingrate! Robber!" he screamed. "Criminal!" yelled Yorick. Trog reached sideways and socked him on the shoulder. "Quiet!" He glared at Dune. "You stole from me," he said, "and you should pay." "I have paid you," said Dune, "with my time and my labor." Kanza shouted out, "That's not enough. We were going to buy a castle with that thing." Minnie let out a piercing wail. Currents of excited talk ran through the crowd as people realized who these roamers were. The Emberites especially stared in fascination at the strange, grubby people who had taken over their city. Lena, still standing at the back, heard them whispering to each other in tones of horror and outrage. "My daughter is right," shouted Trog. "It's not enough." He spread his arms wide and stared out at the villagers. "It's wrong to protect a thief," he roared. "I demand justice." But before Dune could respond, another voice rang out. It was Skago, limping toward Trog, then tugging at his sleeve. "It's my fault, not his. I stole the diamond. Don't blame him. Please, don't." And that was when it occurred to Dune that he could make everything right. He could do it easily, right here and now. "No," he said. "I'm the one who wanted it, and I'm the one who took it away. So, I will give it back." Trog had been about to burst into another bout of rage. He had his fist in the air, ready to shake it at Dune. When he heard this, he stopped short. "What?" "I will return what I took," said Dune. But he realized then that he couldn't. Not right here, not this moment. He had no diamond with him. He stood there uncertainly, reluctant to walk away, not sure what to do next. But Lena knew. "Dune," she cried. Wait one moment. She elbowed her way through the crowd and darted into the nearest shop. In a moment, she was pressing through the crowd again, this time holding a diamond. And when she got to Dune, she gave it to him. He held it up so Trog could see. "Here it is," Dune cried. "For you." All the bluster went out of Trog. He took the diamond and gaped at it, and his family gathered around him and stared, too. Minnie stretched out a hand and stroked the diamond, as if it were a little animal. Kanza chuckled in glee. Skago, though, was looking at Dune, and his face was sad. The villagers watched all this, murmuring and muttering. "Well," said Trog finally, "you did the right and proper thing, Droon. Now that we have our property back, let's get on with the trading." "All right," said Dune, "but first you have to listen to what I'm going to say." Trog shrugged. "Say it, then." Everyone else listened too, pressing up close. The mutterings and murmurings stopped. "My name is not Droon, it's Dune. Dune Harrow. This town, Sparks, is where I live, and the city of Ember, which you called Darkhold, is where I was born and grew up. And so did about 400 of the people who now live in this town." "No," said Trog. Kanza giggled nervously, and Yorick's jaw dropped. "Yes," said Dune, and a chorus of agreement rose from the Emberites in the crowd. Trog scratched his neck, frowning. "Now hold on a minute here," he said. "No," said Dune. "You hold on." He told him about the people of Ember and how they left the city and came to Sparks. He told him how he and Lena Mayfleet had returned to the city and how their plan had been so horribly interrupted by Trog and his family. "It's true," he said. "I took your diamond when Skago offered it to me. I knew it belonged out in the world, not with you." Trog made a noise of disgust. "Pfft, how could you possibly know that?" "I knew it because of the book you found with it," Dune said. "The book I bought from your sister. It said, 'For the people from Ember' on the cover. Besides," he added, "I was sure you didn't know what the diamond really was." "I did too." Trog folded his arms and struck his chin out stubbornly. "What was it then?" asked Dune. "A jewel, nutbrain. I don't suppose you miserable, poverty-stricken people have ever come across enough jewels to know when you see one." "Maybe not," said Dune, "but I knew the diamond was more than a jewel." Trog sputtered, but Dune held up a hand. "Never mind," he said. "Go on with your trading now. Pretty soon you'll see." Trog scowled at him, but he put the diamond in the front of his truck and then went back to his bags and boxes, and he and his family finished laying out their wares. Trog held up each of his items in turn, and people called out their offers. The sun dropped lower in the sky, the shadow of the town hall and the shadows of the trees by the river lengthened across the plaza's stones. As the darkness deepened, and Trog carried on with his trading, Dune and Lena quietly walked all the way around the plaza, going into each shop and stall and speaking briefly with its owner. One by one, the shopkeepers came out of their shops, each with a diamond, its light bulb attached and lit. They stood in their doorways. Soon the whole plaza sparkled and glowed. Trog looked up. He ripped his glasses off as if they might be interfering with his vision, and gazed into the brightness. He seemed utterly stunned. Dune went up to him and grinned. He couldn't resist. "It's called electricity," he said. "Have you heard of it?" End of chapter 26. Summer, welcome in. Happy Thursday, and welcome back, Coco. How was your walk? And work, of course, but I finished. Let's go. I need a drink of my latte. I'm starting to get hungry. I haven't eaten yet. I'll have to have some breakfast after stream. How did work go? How was your walk? I'm not going to listen closely because I missed the beginning and I will be lurking. Just wanted to say good morning and thanks for reading. I'm excited to catch up. Summer, I hope you're having a great week so far. Good morning. Happy Thursday. Buttco. Buttco. Why is Buttspot obsessed with Coco? Why is Buttspot obsessed with Coco? That's what I meant. Buttco. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good old Buttco. Always a bit cheeky, that one. I was trying to think of something, only I'm still waking up. Oh, I wish I was still waking up. I wanted to sleep in, but I couldn't. Well, I did a little bit, but not too much because I wanted to read today. I've not done much beyond Pet Twix and sent colie comic strips. Oh, did you send them to me? Let's go. Heck yes. I can't wait to see them. Very important things. Very important. I've only heated up the coffee Jeremy made for me and still not finished it. Let's go. That means you have more left. Heck yes. I'm now napping and just listening because my roommate makes me tired. Fair. Buttspot has a huge crush on me. It really does. Buttspot really does. All right. So, friends, are we ready for the final chapter of the final Book of Ember? Oh my god, I almost just ripped the book. I got too excited. Buttspot is probably just Miles in secret. Secretly disguised. It could happen. It could happen. But citrus bot? Citribut bot? I don't know. I don't know how it would be, but. Is this the end already? It is, Summer. It's so sad. We are at the final chapter. Citribut. That's, so excited, tears the book apart. I can't. It's not my book. It's not my book. It belongs to the library. I need to return it. Not the ad. Not the ad right before we read the final chapter. What the heck? Citrabut. Alright, let's see if I can stall a little bit longer. It belongs to the world. It does. It's not mine. I can't rip it. Secret, it is already kind of ripped from years of use. I'm excited though. I'm so excited. And then then you guys will be able to see the next book reading on YouTube. I'll upload those. I've only recorded the first 2 book readings of my next book, so I'll have to continue those. But at least those will be ready for you guys to see after this is done. Cleveland tourism ad. I'm not going to go to Cleveland. I've never been to Cleveland. I've heard it's a pretty good place, though. Aw, Luna's here sleeping. She's enjoying the book reading, too. She's having a good old cat nap. Alright, let's get one last stretch in while the ad is coming to an end. You don't even advertise Disney as a reason to go to Ohio. I know, like the only probably good reason to go to Ohio, right? Whew. Let's get ready. Let's get ready for the last chapter. Okay. Are we ready? Are we actually ready? Chapter 27, A Bright Future. After some long and heated conversations, the leaders and people of Sparks agreed to invite the Trog family to become citizens of the town. There were many arguments against this. 1, the Trogs had treated Dune very badly. 2, they had treated Skago badly too. And 3, they weren't especially pleasant people. But there were also a few arguments in their favor. 1, they could have been worse to Skago than they were. 2, Mags had helped Lena. 3, Trog was not ingenious in some ways. And 4, they were clearly not doing at all well as roamers and needed help to become civilized people. The Trogs were given an old 4-car garage in the back of the Pioneer to fix up for themselves. Dune taught them how to use their diamond, and Lena offered to teach them how to read. In time, they settled down fairly well. Mags's flock grew healthier and increased, and eventually provided wool for many coats and blankets. Trog invented a clever way to make collapsible shop awnings, and Yorick and Kanza learned about that gloating, sniggering, pinching, and punching were not acceptable kinds of behavior, and made some efforts to reform. Lizzie changed her mind about becoming Dune's girlfriend. He was too serious, she decided, and besides, it was clear that he liked Lena best. Instead, she began trying to get to know Skago, the strange boy who had come with the Trogs. It was hard to get to know him, because he was very shy, but Lizzie was sure that someone as charming as herself could get through to him. She could tell that he needed laughter and encouragement and kindness. Skago went back to his real name, which was Tim. He explained to Dune that the reason he hadn't ever tried to leave the Trogs was that he had no place else to go. He knew he couldn't make it in the world on his own, but now that he'd come to Sparks, he decided he'd like to live with someone else. He moved into the Pioneer Hotel with the Gnome family, in a room on the first floor, so that he wouldn't have to climb stairs, and he made himself useful by helping in the kitchen. One day, he showed his treasures to Lena and Dune, the ones Dune had retrieved for him from the high shelf in the Trog's apartment. There was a bracelet of glittery red stones that had been his mother's. a boar's tooth on a string that came from his father, 3 shiny pebbles he'd found in a stream, an ancient silver coin, and 2 things he'd found in Ember, a book full of beautiful hand-drawn pictures of insects, and several drawings of a strange city that he discovered on the wall of one of the apartments he'd helped to loot. "My bug book!" cried Dune. "My city pictures!" cried Lena. When Skago found out that Dune and Lena had made these things, he offered to give them back. But Dune said he was planning to start a whole new bug book, and Lena said she'd like 1 or 2 of her pictures, but that he could keep the rest. "I can always do more," she said. "There's endless drawings in my imagination." Kenny sat on a log for a great part of the summer. He'd come across a fox's den up toward the woods, and if he was extremely quiet, the cubs would come out and play, and he would watch them. Once he took Dune up to see them too, and Dune told him about the fox that had helped them when they came out of Ember. The months following that hard winter were also hard, but in a different way. People were no longer struggling to survive. They were simply doing hard but satisfying work of life. Building, planting, cooking, sewing, trading, repairing, learning. Sometimes Dune complained to his father about working so much, when he was tired or when work hadn't been going well. His father had moments of weariness and discouragement too. His right hand had never quite healed properly and still didn't work very well. But what he said to Dune was, "You know, son, I don't think there's such thing as an easy life. There's always going to be hard work, and there will always be misfortunes we can't control, lurking out at the edges. Storms, sickness, wolves. But there is such thing as a good life, and I think we have one here." Dune had to agree. He spent hours working with the diamonds. He discovered a small lever within the metal collar, and when he pressed it, a spark flashed up, startling him, and showing him that the diamond could be used like a match to start a fire. He figured out how to unwind the wires from within the diamond's metal rings, and connect them up to other things besides light bulbs. He found an electric fan in a storage room held at the Pioneer that he repaired, and when he hooked it to a diamond, the fan turned nicely, making a weak stream of cool air. He connected an ancient toaster to a diamond and burned up a few pieces of bread. He figured out how a diamond could run a water pump. If he'd only had the materials for making an electric pump in the first place, and how several diamonds could be hitched together to provide power enough for something larger, like a refrigerator, if ever a roamer should come through with an old refrigerator that could be made to work. But mostly the diamonds simply showed what was possible, that the light from the sun could be caught and stored for the use of human things. Understanding how this was done, finding the means of doing it, learning to make light bulbs, learning to make diamonds, these projects would take many, many years. Dune understood that they wouldn't happen in his lifetime, but he could begin. He could learn. He could make things. And he could teach others. He knew it was the work he chose. Lena made a discovery that involved something old and familiar and something very new. It happened because of a roamer who came through the town late in spring. It was Mrs. Murdo this time who was the first to see him. She was down by the Pioneer, taking some pickled plums to Maddie, and there he was, coming up the road from the south, leading 3 horses. 2 were thin, with saggy backs and drab coats, but one, dark brown with a black mane, held its head high and had a lively step. Mrs. Murdo was struck with an idea. It was such a good idea that she ran ahead of the roamer on her way back into the village, and she was breathing hard when she got to Mary Waters' house. "Mary," she said, "I think we could do something wonderful for Lena." Mary agreed, and so it was done. One of the diamonds was traded for the brown horse, and the horse became Lena's. She named him Fleet, and spent nearly every one of her few spare moments that summer learning to ride him. By fall, she could stay on even when he went at a gallop. Time passed, more winters, not as dark or as hard as the first one. More wet springs, more hot summers. New houses rose, new fields were planted. Roamers came through with things the town needed, and sometimes these were brought with a diamond. In this way, little by little, diamonds ended up in other villages. The roamers told people in those villages where the diamonds had come from and what they were for. And in time, light bulbs from the abandoned places, which had always been useless before, became items in the roamers' stocks. Sometimes people who'd bought the diamonds sent a message back to Sparks, asking to buy more diamonds or wanting to know more about what the diamonds could do. Dune wrote up a booklet of information in response to these requests, and the students in the school helped him make copies of it. In this way, the diamonds and the knowledge of them spread slowly up and down the countryside. More and more, the villages in the area communicated with each other. The roamers, whose oxen walked slowly and who stopped often, were the main connection, so messages didn't go back and forth very quickly. This was what made Lena think once again about being a messenger. She began riding out across the empty lands to small settlements and towns, following the roamers' routes, but going far faster than they did, carrying letters and small packages from one place to another. Sometimes Dune went with her, sitting behind her and holding her around her waist, out to the ruins of ancient towns, where he gathered up old electric shavers and hair dryers and plugs and wires that might help him with his work. Sometimes Torin went with her. He called it going on roamer practice. Lena taught Torin the song she'd heard from the old roamer about Ember. She had recalled the words by now, and she knew Mags had had it wrong. Mags had sung it this way: "What's hidden will come to light again, a diamond jewel more precious than gold." But those lines should have been, "What's hidden will come to light again. It's far more precious than diamonds and gold." The precious treasure was the people of Ember, just as Lena had understood when she first heard the song. The diamond was precious too, but without people to find it, understand it, and use it, it wouldn't have had much value at all. Most often, however, Lena went on her trips alone. Mrs. Murdo worried a little that she would have accidents, or meet up with bandits, or get lost. "She's just a child," Mrs. Murdo fretted. And yet, she reminded herself, look at all the remarkable things she and Dune have done. It wasn't because they had extraordinary powers, really, but because of how well they used the ordinary powers everyone had. The power of courage, the power of kindness, the powers of curiosity and knowledge. Lena would be all right, Mrs. Murdo concluded. After all, she was growing up and would soon be deciding on her own what she wanted to do. She asked Lena to please not go out into the wilderness during the very hottest or coldest parts of the year, and Lena agreed. Lena divided her time between helping Mrs. Murdo and Dr. Hester at home and going out on her messenger trips. She loved embarking on these trips, readying the saddlebags Mrs. Murdo had helped her make, packing food and supplies, planning her route, and she loved arriving at her destinations and delivering the letters people had been waiting for. But most of all, she loved the trip itself. She loved slinging herself up onto Fleet's broad, strong back in the early morning and setting out, first at a walk as they went through the village, and then, when they got out into the empty roads, faster and faster, till they sped forward at a gallop, and the rushing air flicked through Fleet's mane and made Lena's hair stream out behind her. Maybe there was no happily ever after, as in that book of Edward's, but there was happiness sometimes, and she had it now, doing what she knew she was born for, to carry messages and to go fast. One day, on her way back from one of her messenger rides, it was nearly 5 years after the discovery of the diamonds, a bundle of letters slipped from one of her bags and fell to the ground. It was her fault. She hadn't packed very neatly. She saw it go, and she brought Fleet to a halt so she could get down and retrieve it. But one of the letters had somehow blown beneath his feet before he stopped, and it was torn to shreds. She picked up all the pieces she could find. It probably wasn't an urgent letter. It was for Edward Pocket, from a man in another town who was also interested in finding books. But it would be embarrassing to have to admit that she'd ruined it. She stopped at the library to explain this to Edward. He wasn't there, but Dune was, bent over some thick volume with damp, warped pages. A thought struck Lena. She smiled to herself. "Dune, look," she said. She sat down beside him and spread out the bits of the torn letter. "I think most of it's here," she said. "Maybe you could help me put it back together." "Sure," he said. He started moving the bits around. "Let's see. This looks like it must say, and so then this would go here, and this." He paused and looked up at her. "Haven't we done this before?" Lena laughed. So did Dune. A look went between them, like a quick current of electricity. Sparks grew and prospered in those years. New houses arose behind the Pioneer Hotel, built in clusters around small courtyards so families could live easily connected to each other. There came a day when one of these houses belonged to Lena and Dune. Poppy lived with them, and next door lived Mrs. Murdo, who created a neat and well-scrubbed place by herself until, a year or two later, she accepted an offer from Dune's father, who left his small cottage to be with her, and she did her best to tolerate the untidy but interesting heaps of small items he couldn't resist collecting. Much, much later, on the site of the ruined city that Lena had seen from Casper's wagon, a new city slowly began to rise. A city of bright buildings with glittering rooftops. Not buildings so high they turned the streets into shadowy canyons, but buildings hardly taller than the trees that grew around them. It was a beautiful city, a sparkling, dazzling city, where trolleys powered by the sun carried people up and down the hills, gardens flourished in schoolyards and between shops, and ships with colored sails arrived at the harbor from distant ports. Lena never saw the city, of course, not with her actual eyes, though she had seen something very like it within the eyes of her imagination. But her great-great-granddaughter lived there, and she kept, tucked away in a carved wooden box, the fragile old drawings that Lena had done. She took them out every now and then to look at and marveled at how they caught the spirit of the city that Lena had never seen. But all that was many years into the future. Now, in the warm summer, after the expedition to Ember, Lena is out in the field of wildflowers with Fleet. Dune is trying to hook up an old hairdryer to a diamond. Mrs. Murdo is sweeping the courtyard of the doctor's house, and Dr. Hester is in the garden scattering corn for the chickens. Torrin is sitting nearby on a tree stump with his airplane. He makes it swoop and zoom. He is trying to imagine himself in it, traveling off to distant lands, being the greatest roamer who ever lived. Of course, he can't get off the ground, and he never will, but imagine that he could. Imagine that he could fly upward like a bird. He would see the green landscape of spring spread out below, with the river curving through it, the fields dotted with yellow mustard flowers and orange poppies, and the people out doing their work. Up higher, he would see beyond Sparks, the roads leading to other villages and settlements, and on the roads, the roamers who connect one place to another. Then, imagine he could fly even higher, like an airplane. Now he could see the vastness of the earth below. The mountains would look like crumpled cloth, bleached white at the peaks. The lakes would glint like coins. Roads would be threads. And the grassy hillsides and fields would be a green carpet as far as his eyes could see. Here and there, clusters of dots would appear where people had settled, but there would be wide distances between them. The world would seem beautiful and peaceful from up here. He wouldn't see the storms and quarrels and terrors that could make life hard. And at last, imagine that he could fly higher still, as high as a rocket heading into space. From here, he would see the round edge of the planet, in the gulf between himself and the Earth's surface. He might notice an object moving along on an unsteady orbit. Sometimes it remains so high above the Earth that a person below could mistake it for a slow-moving meteor or a comet. Sometimes it swoops very close to the Earth. It is what many people in the area had noticed lately. Most of them thought it was a traveling star, but it isn't a star at all. It's a small, unmanned spacecraft that set out toward Earth more than 200 years ago, after an astronomer named Hoyt McCoy, who lived in a town called Yonwood, made the first contact between the human race and beings on another world. At the time, his discovery was kept secret, except for a few privileged. Other scientists were told, and so was the president of the country, who paused for a moment in his rush to war to contemplate what this discovery might mean. Eventually, some years later, the news leaked out. Newspapers ran headlines about little green men, and people got very excited. But after a while, when no little green men showed up, the usual concerns of life took over again, and the small craft making its way through space was nearly forgotten. 50 years passed. Then came the great disaster. And after that, there was no one who remembered it at all. But the spacecraft continued its journey, and those who had sent it continued to monitor its progress over the many decades of its flight. Finally, a few months before Lena and Dune made their trip back to Ember, it arrived. It has been collecting data to send back to its home planet. It will report that the magnificent and powerful civilization it had expected to find seems to have disappeared, and that a much smaller and humble one has took its place. It will observe that a great part of this world lies in darkness during the night, but not all. In some places, sparks of light shine, not fires, but electric lights, bright gleaming spots like diamonds in the darkness. The people here seem not to have lost everything that came before, the little craft will report. Some of them have survived. Some of their learning has too. It seems clear that they are making a new start. End of the Diamond of Darkhold and the Books of Ember.